Before we begin, let me say something straight from the heart. Happy birthday to you, born on October 25th. Today is not just a square on a calendar. It is a small constellation made of your memories, your hopes, and your stubborn survival. Maybe this year has carried you farther than you planned, or maybe it kept you circling the same block looking for parking. Maybe the celebration is loud, full of laughter and music and people, or maybe it is quiet, just you and the hum of a lamp and the gentle percussion of your own breathing. Either way, this day knows your name. It remembers the way you've kept going when the road leaned uphill. It remembers the private victories nobody else noticed, the phone call you returned, the apology you gave, the morning you rose anyway. So before the candles, before the wish, pause. Feel the weight of your own life in your hands. Let the world, for one clean second, be soft around you. Let this day remind you that you are allowed to begin again, that love is a lesson you are still learning, and that your presence here matters more than you sometimes dare to believe. Happy birthday, and welcome to your next chapter. You may not realize it, but some of the greatest legends who ever lived were also born on this day. Their stories are not mirrors meant to accuse you. They are windows meant to open. What ties them together is not one talent or one destination, but a certain posture toward struggle, the belief that discipline can outlast doubt, that patience is a tool, that starting over is not a shame, but a strategy. They remind us that a life can be built brick by brick until one day it looks like a cathedral. You share a birthday with brilliance not so you can compete with it, but so you can borrow its light when your own feels dim. Tonight, we'll walk through 5 lives stitched to your date, 5 very different roads through the same calendar door, and we'll listen for the lessons they offer. If you're ready, take a breath and come with me. Legend 1. He arrived in the world on an Andalusian morning. Pablo Picasso, born in Malaga, a child who could turn a simple line into a secret. Before he was old enough to grow a mustache, he could draw like an ancestor, copying plaster casts with a precision that could break your heart. But his beginning is not a coronation. It is a restlessness. There were classrooms where he excelled and classrooms he escaped. Studios where the coal stove barely fought the Paris cold. Letters home that tried to sound cheerful when money ran thin. He moved through apprenticeship the way a river moves through rock, not patiently, not slowly, but with pressure directed at the places that could be reshaped. He learned that craft is a ladder and rebellion is a door. In Barcelona, he fell in with poets and painters who stayed up late, making the air electric. In Paris, he learned hunger and fellowship. The blue period did not come from theory. It came from grief, from the suicide of a friend and the shock of poverty, from the discovery that monochrome could be more honest than a parade of colors. He painted harlequins and beggars and mothers with a tenderness that made their sorrow dignified, not pitied. The rose period followed not as a brand refresh, but as a change in weather. Small circuses and quiet joy entering the work. He kept moving because the work asked him to. Then came the question that would reroute art. What if reality is many things at once? With Georges Braque, he dismantled the visible world into facets, not to be cruel, but to be truthful. You do not meet a guitar or a cafe table from only one angle. You encounter them as memory and touch and sound and time. Cubism was a wager that painting could admit that complexity. They pasted newspaper into canvases, turned bottles into planes, and in doing so, they invited painters everywhere to move from imitation to investigation. It was the visual equivalent of admitting that a human being can be contradictory and still be whole. His rise was not a straight line. The work kept changing because he kept changing. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon arrived like a slap, skeptical of everything polite. Guernica rose like a storm cloud over a century at war. A town bombed during the Spanish Civil War, translated into black and white and iron will, the language of suffering being made legible to the world. He moved through decades as if moving through rooms. Analytic cubism into synthetic cubism, neoclassical echoes, surrealist whispers, a late-life burst of work that looked like a dare to time itself. He modeled and etched, carved and threw clay, cut metal, and designed costumes. He did not let the museum of his past dictate the studio of his present. Compared globally, Picasso does not merely sit beside his peers. He rearranges the room they occupy. Where Matisse gathered joy in color and Mondrian found purity in grids, Picasso delighted in risk, a serial reinvention that made each period argue with the last. There are painters with greater serenity, painters with gentler voices, but few with his range, his velocity, his refusal to be cornered. He helped define the 20th century's visual grammar and then refused to be defined by it. Place his work against any era's masters, and he does not shrink. He forces the question of what the word master even means. What stays after the exhibition's close is not only his fame, but his discipline, a daily negotiation with wonder. If he could lean close to you today, he might whisper, "Begin again. Begin when you have been praised. Begin when you have been ignored. Begin when grief turns your palette to blue. Begin when an audience begs for repetition and your conscience bids you to change. Talent will open the first door. Practice will keep building more. Let your life be a studio where courage is the only dress code." Legend 2. Across an ocean and a discipline, another October 25th child kept his eyes on the night. Norris Russell did not paint stars. He learned to read them. As a boy, he had the particular quiet that belongs to people who think in diagrams. He studied, he calculated, he made errors and corrected them, building a mind that trusted both measurement and imagination. The observatory became a second home. Lenses cool to the touch, notebooks where numbers settled into meaning, and patient hours spent at the eyepiece while the world slept. His turning point came with a graph that would become a compass. Working alongside the insights of the Danish astronomer Einar Hertzsprung, Russell helped formalize the plot that placed stars by their intrinsic brightness and their spectral type. A map where the main sequence ran like a silver river through the heavens. On that paper space, suddenly, the zoo of stars had families, dwarfs and giants, the sun taking its modest place among the throng. With that diagram, astronomers could begin to tell stories not just about where stars are, but about what they are and how they live and die. His rise was not theatrical, it was infrastructural. At Princeton he taught, mentored, argued kindly, and edited carefully. He co-authored textbooks that turned chaos into curriculum, and papers that replaced hunches with frameworks. Even when he was wrong, and every scientist must be sometimes, he was wrong in a way that moved the work forward, inviting better measurements and stronger conclusions. He moved between theory and observation, the way a good sailor moves between wind and keel, adjusting and adjusting until the vessel held its course. Compared globally, Russell's place rests less on spectacle than on scaffolding. If the physicists who split the atom detonated history, Russell furnished the blueprints by which countless observers would build their towers. Navigators, satellite designers, astrophotographers, dreamers on their porches, all inherit a sky clarified by those axes. The letters O, B, A, F, G, K, and M stop being alphabet soup and become a code you can use to find your way in the dark. Through his work on stellar atmospheres and classification, he made the cosmos legible to craft, not just awe. The lesson he offers you is humility yoked to persistence. Build frameworks, not just moments. When your life feels like a scatter of points, lay down your axes and see what pattern emerges. When others rush to declare a breakthrough, do the slower work of making meaning durable. Seek colleagues who will argue with you in good faith. Share credit the way stars share a constellation, generously, accurately, with delight. Then keep going, because the sky is not done yet. Legend 3. On a dusty field in Manoguayabo, in the Dominican Republic, a skinny kid threw a baseball that seemed to think for itself. Pedro Martínez was told he was too small, that he did not fit the mold of intimidation that baseball traditionally loved. He kept showing up anyway. He threw in the heat and the dusk, learning how to make the ball dance. His beginnings were stitched with doubt and devotion, a family sacrifice here, a kind coach there, and an inner voice that would not permit surrender. Every day was practice in public faith. The turning point came with mastery of 3 pitches that behaved like a riddle. A fastball that could ride high or dive late. A changeup that floated like kindness and then vanished. A curveball that unwound a hitter's timing as if it were a loose thread. Montreal gave him a stage. Boston gave him a cathedral. In an era when hitters were feasting, when ballparks were small and the sluggers large, his dominance looked unfair. Not because he broke the rules, but because he obeyed the hardest ones better than anyone. He lived at the edge of the strike zone as if it were his home address. His rise is a legend, braided from precision, bravado, and joy. He piled strikeouts and trophies, yes, but he also piled memories. An all-star game where he made the best hitters in the world look like they were reading the wrong music. Autumn nights in New England, where the cold couldn't touch him. A parade where the curse of a long-suffering city felt finally, blessedly, over. At his peak, he did not merely dominate. He redefined what domination could look like, intelligence disguised as fire, guile wearing the mask of power, fearlessness wearing a grin. Compared globally to the great pitchers, his case shines by context and by courage. He stood small against giants and unstitched their timing. He brought dignity to the mound for players from the Caribbean and across Latin America, proof that excellence travels on talent and discipline, not on stereotype. He lifted teams and terrified lineups and turned ballparks into classrooms, where the final exam was always arriving at 95 miles per hour. And when the work was done, he smiled. He carried his flag. He thanked his family. He remembered the field where the dream started. The morale he places gently in your hand is simple. Master your craft until it looks like magic to everyone else. When they say you are not the right size, answer with command. When the moment swells, meet it with a smile that says you have been rehearsing your courage. And when the victory comes, tip your cap to the people and the places that raised you, because no one rides a parade alone. Legend 4. In northwest London, a girl listened carefully. Zadie Smith watched the city as if it were an orchestra, each neighborhood an instrument playing its own line. Libraries and bus stops were her classrooms. She learned that identity is never a single note. It is a chord, complicated and gorgeous. She wrote early and she wrote often, training her ear to catch how people actually speak, how neighborhoods actually breathe. She understood that a story is not only what happens, it is who is allowed to tell it and whose telling gets believed. Her turning point arrived with a debut that felt inevitable the moment it appeared. White Teeth burst into the literary world, carrying wit, tenderness, and a glorious mess of humanity. Readers who didn't think they liked novels about families found themselves laughing, arguing, and then recognizing their own kitchens on the page. Success could have hardened into formula. Instead, she kept changing tempo. On Beauty paid homage to Forster, while being utterly her own, and brought home major honors. Later, N.W. braided voices and streets into a polyphonic map. Swing Time traced friendship and ambition across continents. Essays examined everything from pop culture to ethics, with a mind both playful and exact. Compared globally, she stands among contemporary giants, not as an echo, but as an equal, and at times as a corrective. Where some writers prefer monologue, she composes polyphony. Where some draw thick borders, she invites crossings. She trusts readers to keep up with complicated feelings and to enjoy being surprised by sentences that refuse the obvious. For many who grew up between cultures or between expectations, her work says, "You do not need to choose which half of yourself is allowed to speak. Let the full choir in." The lesson she offers is to attend to the particular. Notice the chipped mug, the way a father clears his throat before advice, the humor inside grief, the grace hidden in a queue, the choreography of friends in a corner shop. Make room for other voices in your pages and your plans. Curiosity is not a weakness. It is an ethic. The world can be loud with slogans. Bring your listening and then answer with prose, with policies, with designs, with songs that keep faith with complexity and kindness. Legend 5. Far to the south of London and west of the Atlantic's edge, a Virginia boy learned to chart his way by discipline and cold air. Richard Evelyn Byrd grew up with a body that sometimes betrayed him and a will that did not. In a young century learning to fly, he decided that flight could be more than a dare. It could be a method, a way to solve problems, to map the blank, to bring precision to places that history had left as rumor. He studied navigation until it lived in his muscles. He learned to trust instruments because human senses misbehave in polar light. He grew into command, not as a costume, but as a responsibility. His turning points were geographical and moral. He planned and led expeditions that asked ordinary men to do extraordinary things for months on end. He learned to make a home where the world itself seemed to say no. In 1929, he flew over the South Pole with a crew whose courage deserves to be named alongside his, and he helped establish bases in Antarctica that could support real science rather than stunts. Not every claim surrounding his earliest polar flights would pass the fiercest scrutiny of later historians, and good history should keep asking those questions. But the arc of achievement is not in doubt. He turned regions that had been legend into places with coordinates, habitations, routines. His rise was built from lists and logistics, from the patient courage of repetition. The expeditions were cities of discipline carved into ice. Radios to be fixed, food to be rationed, tempers to be kept, storms to be outweighted, aircraft to be coaxed into living another day. Compared globally to other explorers, Byrd belongs with the few who married daring to organization. The tradition of polar suffering is vast. He helped replace it, when possible, with planning. He understood that the leader's real job is to bring people home. The impact is still visible in the way we think of remote places. Scientific stations and international agreements now treat the poles as classrooms as much as frontiers. Satellites and ice cores have turned those latitudes into archives that help us read Earth's past and forecast its future. And Byrd's efforts helped open the doors that made that work possible. The morale he offers you on a bright, cold morning is this: ambition is not arrogance when it is yoked to preparation and care for your crew. Choose your South Poles, train for them, write down your coordinates, and leave the route visible so others can follow. And now we circle back to you, the reason this story gathered. Maybe you carry a paintbrush or a laptop, a stethoscope or a set of keys for a bakery's early morning. Maybe you are between jobs, between chapters, between the person you were and the one you are becoming. Hear me. You are not late, and you are not lost. The people we met tonight did not share a single path. They shared a way of standing in the world. They kept their eyes open. They kept faith with their craft when nobody was clapping. They treated failure as a school, not a sentence. So take this date as permission. Let it be a hinge, a small turning that lets a larger door swing. If this touched you, stay with us. Subscribe so we can keep telling these stories, and leave a comment with your birthday so we can celebrate you or someone you love next. Until then, may this October 25th wrap you in a calm conviction. You are allowed to begin again and again and again, until the life you're shaping fits your hands like a well-used instrument.